Good afternoon and welcome to Bordeaux Unpicked. I am Joe Muller. I'm back. I only found out after listening to the last part of the podcast recording that I was kicked out. I thought I was being a team player, and squad rotation, all that. Not gonna know. I was ousted by none other than Mr. Hargrave, who's here.
I am indeed. Yep. Good afternoon, Joe. In our new office, different room, reverberating like a good one. So yeah, let's hope it's all right.
That's a good point. If you hear some echoes, it's just the new surroundings which we're getting used to, and therefore this microphone. Guy, you're joining us.
Joe, good to have you back. Thank you.
Heading off fine wine buying, and then we've got also our Bordeaux buyer, Marc Ditcham.
Good afternoon, all.
Little debut.
I know. I've done one before, but
it's
quite nice to join you.
Brilliant. Well, we had a very busy week because we were sort of moving out of Thomas More Street, our office, last week, towards the end of it. But it was also a very busy campaign. And as such, we had a little bit of a delay on recording this. So we're coming to you on Monday. But we should probably start. It's it was a pretty hectic one. A lot came out, a lot of action. We'll start with the Monday. I think there's only one place to start, really. So that's with the wines of Francois Mitjavile.
Yeah.
And his 2024s. So, Guy, I don't know if you want to sort of say any words on the starting point, and then I'm more than happy to sort of give some opinion. I love these wines in 24 for a very obvious reason, where I think the quality is brilliant for Francois Mitjavile's wines in 24. With the campaign unfolding, there's some successes, quite a lot of misfires, shall we say. But in terms of wines that I think people will end up being particularly happy they purchased, I would actually argue Mitjavile will probably be top of the tree, because the 24 character, which some people will be looking on negatively, whether that be the type of tannin, the slightly greener character, a donut wine, we use those sort of terms that we've used for the sort of lesser side of the vintage. You could be further from anything with Mitjavile wines, because they yearn to get succulent fruit within there. They want texture. They've got incredible freshness. We know the way that they farm is generally sort of later picked. They really push for fruit within the vineyards, and therefore when they translate the wine into the winemaking in the winery as well. And I think at 24, you've got, these Mitjavile wines are slightly toned down to normal, but still giving that sort of flamboyance and brilliance.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the Francois Mitjavile has got a reputation for making very high quality wines in more challenging vintages, and it seems flippant to say that as a sort of an introduction, but it's true. And the alcohol is lower this year. It's nice and fresh. The style of the vintage seems to really suit these late ripening sites. And just as a little bit of introduction, we're looking at 3 different estates here, across which 4 different wines are made. So the original estate is Château Rotebeuf, which is in Saint-Emilion. It's high up in the hills, and it's amphitheatre setup. So you've got this natural ripeness which derives from these very very sunny slopes. And from Château Rotebeuf, there is just the one wine, which is Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, produced. And then elsewhere in the range, Francois bought a property called Roc de Combe. So that's in the Côte de Bourg, about 45 minutes to the northwest. And that's where he produces 2 different wines. So Roc de Combe itself from the higher slopes, and then from the lower slopes down by the Dordogne River, he makes a wine called Domaine de Combe. And then the 4th wine in the quartet is L'Orage, and that's from Castillon, Côte de Bordeaux. And this is where Louis Mitjavile, so the next generation, produces wine with his wife, Caroline. And those guys have been there since the 06, I think it was.
6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8 vintage. Yeah, I mean, that was roughly when it started. So those are the 4 different wines. And I mean, just in terms of where Francois himself came from, the building of Château Rotebeuf was actually where Milute, his wife, grew up. So that was their family home. And it really is a stunning sort of pretty place in Saint-Laurent-des-Combes is the name of the little sort of hamlets where it's based. they got married and shortly afterwards took over the family property. This was in 1978. And the wine itself, Tetra Boeuf, hadn't been made since the 1961 vintage, or hadn't been bottled at the estate. So it was Milut's father who was previously producing the wine under the name Château Le Turt. So there was then a hiatus, and Francois took this estate back up again in the late 1970s, and he was at the time working at Château Figeac as well, so he was sort of doing the two things in tandem, and only properly started to produce Tetra Boeuf as a wine in itself, essentially in the 1980s. So that was a little bit of background in terms
It's
of
really one of those sort of romantic examples, really, because it's, you know, somebody who's obviously very passionate, getting into making wine. Circumstances bring around the opportunity to purchase the property, starting out with hardly any money, because we know that, you know, for example, it's a lot of cement used in the early days. You can't afford new oak until I think it's the 85 vintage. It's the first, starts drip feeding it in and really finding the sense of place. And when you go and visit there, it's the property is beautiful, but when you sort of, as you approach the house and you sort of take a right around the corner, you've then got the wall, don't you? And you can see as it sort of drops down, and you can get that much more of that impression of Saint-Emilien's limestone cliffs as well. And whilst you're there, because not all of these Saint-Emilion properties, the ones that are on the cliff sort of fascias, if you like, will give you that sort of overwhelming sense of place. And I think with Tetra Boeuf Francois, you certainly have that. But then his style certainly comes through, and I love the story of the estate, and it's also, you know, quite Burgundian in its approach to, you know, the cellars, the way he has his cellars, the way when we go and taste it. I think you mentioned in a previous pod, Will, you know, where you just pick a barrel and you jump in and have a little sip, rather than any sort of standardized sort of tasting, etc. But even the cellar itself, it's got that feel of just traditional, set down deeper, dark. It's not fancy in any way. It's practical and functional, and it's got that feel. And because obviously the production size isn't big, it sort of gets quite often compared to sort of Burgundian cellars on that line as well. But yeah, the wines. What were your? I mean, we loved Tetra Boeuf. We scored it high, and certainly one of our wines of the vintage and rock. And we've all tasted. So
I mean, I thought the wines were as different from each other as they've ever been, which might sound like a stupid thing to say, what guys outlined. They come from, you know, 3 different estates, but
I know what you mean.
different wines. But they really did show that, and I like that. I mean, but then that should almost always be the case with them in a trickier vintage, because they don't make second wines. So it's one major factor that a lot of other estates make at least some sort of selection. But, you know, I think Francois quite rightly, and it's hard to argue with, he says, well, if you want a real translation of a place, to be crude, you shove it all in.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what he's saying in terms of you do your selection in the vineyard, what you choose to bring in becomes the wine. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, I
was impressed.
with Tetra Boeuf especially, I loved this year, and it was one of my top scoring wines for the reason that, you know, I scribbled down it's a sort of a Tetra Boeuf toned down a few notches, and what I mean by that is the mineral presence at this stage was far more obvious than it normally is, because sometimes that succulent fruit which Francois captures through late picking, you know, he talks about degradation of tannins, but also fruit, which then translates into that sort of wild character of fruit within the wines, that sort of wild strawberries, and that's all sort of slightly reduced ever so much. But then you've got this chalky sort of tension within Tetra Boeuf, which quite often for me takes a while for it to come through the fruit, as in a bigger vintage. And, you know, he's always got this, you know, because the mind-boggling freshness that he packs in there when you've got so much opulence and so much joyous ripeness within the fruit profile has always been the thing that makes them stand out from the pack anyway. And it delivers brilliantly. I think, you know, they're out £770 a 6, Roc de Com at 260 a 6, and Domaine de Com 185 a 6, and L'Orage 325 a 12. So, you know, for Bordeaux lovers, our stance here is simple. The quality is the main reason you're buying this. You know, being candid, there are some vintages that you can actually pick up of Tetra Boeuf from us, sort of slightly less. However, it is not this isn't going to be the 24s that you're looking for. You can pick a sort of smaller vintage, and you can pick it up at that price. And by all means, come and speak to us about it. But this is where you're going to get the best quality for us in 2024, and with Rock as well. I mean, that's just it stands up to so
Definitely.
much.
I mean, they're punching above the weight, she said, and also they have this weird track record of 04 and 14 and 24, which is not necessarily exciting for a lot of people. Really are, and you weirdly have the same with 97, 07, and 17, which are amongst for those insiders like 07, 04. They're real wines people want to buy. 97 likewise. So it's a bit of an exception, but in a good way.
Yeah, no, I like those sort of slightly more challenging cooler years from Francois. I just think it's sort of, it comes across with a bit more elegance, dare I say. But anyway, so Monday also saw the release of the Bartons. So they came out, Liverpool Barton and Langoa at 289 a 6 and 157 a 6. Mark, maybe you can have your sort of look. How did they fly or not?
The last 2 years from the Barton stable have been quite difficult. So this year, as you said, it's 289 for 6 for the Learvilles, but there was 3 vintages on the market for cheaper. 21, 17, 13, again, comparable vintages. So it's been a struggle the last couple of years. We appreciate it's difficult for them to come down much more than what their discounted percentage was this year. I can't quite remember what it was off the top of my head, maybe 20%, but it just feels a struggle because there is a lot of supply still out on the market at the moment, and I think there's more than enough for consumers to tuck into, and there has to be a real need to buy the 2024.
It's often quite a good barometer of a vintage, a wine like Barton that has a popular following, makes incredibly consistent wine in a positive sense. And I totally agree with you. They can't come down by 40% or something because their cost base is just where it is. So, yeah, it's one of those that you sort of put your finger in the air and
I mean, I know what you mean. It's an interesting one though, because last week as well saw a plethora of releases which did come out as cheapest in market. So just to sort of shout those sort of names out, and we can pick a few here and there. We didn't taste them all. Some we did, and some we will give a bit more of a spotlight to. But so Kerwan, Clos Forte, Mouton stable, both Petit and the Grand Van. Then Domaine de Chevalier Rouge, not the Blanc. Carmes Haut-Brion, which we'll definitely have a little chat about. So those are a good handful of guys who decided, Gloria as well, who decided to come out with a reduction, which meant they were, for a consumer, if you wanted to buy the 24, there's nothing else available for less. So I commend that. And out of that list, I think let's start with the 2, because these are 2 big successes. So far, from our point of view, Lafite, Mouton, Carmes Haut-Brion, and this is out of the left bank Place wines. They're the ones we've had the most success with. They've all had that sort of common theme of coming out, economically beneficial, should we call it? They're certainly the best value vintage you can get from all of those estates. Mouton did really well, 761 per 3. In fact, I would possibly argue that was the one that had the biggest drop versus any vintage. So, to come out for almost £250 a bottle in bond for Mouton, we were talking to customers. It was quite nice. It was refreshing to be able to speak to customers on the phone and say, well, yeah, for £250 a bottle Mouton, the last time you could pick it up at that rate is many, many years ago.
14 or before.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, so just to put some figures on that, because I've got them in front of me, but it was 22% cheaper than the 23 release price. It was 51% cheaper than the 22 release price. And it was the 20% lower than the market price of the 2019. So, that falls into the category of no-brainer.
Yeah.
It was a good wine. I don't think it was a sort of legendary Mouton by any means, but, it has a certain status because it's a first growth and people follow the brand closely because, it's got a certain iconic status. So I think they did what needed to be done.
The metric that they seem to be using at the moment for the larger estates is they're either matching the lowest price on the market or they're 30% down on last year, which would be highly commendable. But with the 2022s, 20% up on the previous year, it still needs to come down. It's a price. This year's price almost seems to be. It should have been last year's price, as it were. So they're doing enough, but they could be doing more, I think.
And we tasted Mouton first, didn't we, as well? So
Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah,
Drinking a judge.
calibrating. Yeah, you're calibrating thoughts over
Right where you're going
vintage.
to be.
Yeah. But I mean, that conversation is fun, and this leads on to be talking to customers about, for this price, you could be drinking Mouton on your table with friends. You're going to a wine dinner, you've got a fancy dinner party coming up, an occasion, or even dare say, you've got a good friend that you're willing to sort of gift or, something like that. It ticked so many boxes. And I think hopefully as the campaign goes on and the big names, the other first grades, whoever may still remaining to come out, once they are sort of in the past, hopefully we'll be having that conversation more and more with people about the second grades and the third grades and the fourth. So those wines that are priced between 25 and 100 a bottle, because there will be some brilliant drinking opportunities for people just to pick up here.
Yeah, but it's interesting to compare Mouton and its reception with Lafite, for example, because I think I'm right to say, Mark, that we sold far more Lafite than we did Mouton.
Yeah, Lafite was incredibly successful this year, arguably, I think, more so than last year without having the figures to hand. Mouton has done well. I was just looking at the figures this morning. But yeah, I think we're still maybe about just under a third down compared to last year's Mouton releases. But yeah, 2/3 overall against Lafite last year. So yeah, there's a massive love for Lafite. And tomorrow we've got the release of Clarence Dillon's stable. So another first growth.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
Number 3 of the campaign.
Well, before we go on to Haut-Brion, let's talk about arguably one of the wines, one of the releases of the vintage, Carmes Haut-Brion. So that came out at £354 a 6. So cheapest in market. So massive box ticked. Quality, we liked it. Critics are very positive on it on the whole. And as an estate, I was talking to another customer who wasn't that familiar with Carmes Haut-Brion, isn't actually quite a big Burgundy fan. I was just saying, well, look, Carmes it's the equivalent of one of those.
Where are we going now? This could be interesting.
Yeah, it's equivalent of one of those sort of Burgundian domains who's had a rise in the last sort of 5-6 years through focusing on more modern trends and real sort of quality focused vinification side, because where you're just seeing incredible purity of fruit represented in the wines, a finesse and elegance within the structure of the wines, and where you'll see investment, and that's why I'm sort of likening it to what you've seen with some of those.
And also the 17, which we've all had recently, and we had the 18 too with Guillaume when he was over. These are genuinely wines you can drink younger without sort of sacrificing the properness of wanting to age them as well. So yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and you've got that sort of whole bunch fermentation character on the Cabernet Franc, which is really quite cool. It adds a different sort of nuance to the wine, which I think has been very welcomed, and particularly with how with how Carmes are managing it. And as such, they've just been getting more and more plaudits. They really are an estate in sort of locomotion reputationally, and its price. I mean, £59 a bottle, where you're talking about a wine where most people regard it as, for the last 4 years, they've been in the top 5 wines, arguably, of the vintage, certainly top 10. So for a wine of that, hitting that high, £59, Mark sold well, didn't it? Because
we've almost sold out. We've got a little bit left, so do call up or email your account manager. Yeah,
for me, that's through the Plus system so far. That's probably been the biggest must-buy, the biggest no-brainer we've come out with.
Is it true to say that we've sold more this year than last year, Carl?
Similar.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
But given that the percentage is down in terms of their production, I think we've probably...
Yeah, it just seems to me that the gap in between the between the winners and the losers, or the sort of the Château who have a successful release and those who kind of fall flat, seems to be widening in a way. And I mean, the names that we've been talking about now, there are two first growths, okay, Mouton and Lafite, and they have a certain standing due to the fact that they're first growths. But then you have to stand out somehow otherwise. I mean, Carmes Haut-Brion, okay, they do a bit of whole bunch fermentation. If you taste them in a lineup, they taste very different from anything else which is being made in Bordeaux today. And Tautrope, or Roc de Com, I mean, they're doing the same thing. They're so distinguishable from other wines because they have this super late baked character.
Yeah, on Tetra Buff as well. As you just picked up, because it just fell into my thoughts on the price as well. Something to really highlight is, Francois is as a man of principle. He's in the last 10 to 12 years, he's only raised his price once. So when everyone was, clamoring to increase their prices when the market was in that sort of very bull period and everything was going gangbusters, he only ever put his price up once at that time. And then came down the next year. Yeah. So, I mean, some people I know may comment, oh, well, look, why hasn't he come down further? That's because the greater picture is he's kept a very steady scenario for all customers, which is actually quite a lot of respect for that. An interesting one to use as a case study, I guess, is Domaine de Chevalier, because they kind of went both ways. The Chevalier, the reason I'm bringing this, it's not a wine that we did taste the white, so I can't actually comment on the quality. We relatively, the red was actually quite a good example of Pessac in both its structure and fruit. We scored it 16 to 16 and a half. But they came out with the red at 192 a 6, which again is, you can't find Domaine de Chevalier Rouge, a vintage for another vintage for less. But on the white, you can find, and some good vintages, 21, 19, 17, 13, all for less. So they've really gone in sort of totally different directions, red and white. So it's quite
I think there's maybe a little bit of them sort of stating their case for being one of the top white wines. And I think so. Yes, you're right. In a way, they repositioned the white a little bit. I did think it was very good. And I did taste the Rouge, not quite as well as the white, but I mean, that's, you're talking about a wine that's a third less expensive.
Yeah.
I think the white, I get it. But then 21 and 17 are kind of the last two equivalent vintages. So if you were being really analytical about it, you'd say, yes, the reds should be the cheapest vintage in the market. If
it's possibly not
buying, whereas the whites, should they be around the same vintage?
Yeah, that's true.
It's not really the way it works, because white Bordeaux en Primeur is not a massive thing. But I sympathise with it slightly.
Exactly. I don't think people are stocking up on white Bordeaux en Primeur. I mean, I think it's something that will hit the market largely at a later date. And I think whites from 24 are genuinely exciting as well. I think they're a little under the radar because Bordeaux Blanc is something which is not at the forefront of people's minds at this time of year. But I think in due course they will gain their position in the market.
And then that sort of word repositioning, that leads quite nicely into Cos d'Estournel. They've tried to be, for the last certainly 5-6 years, clearly reposition himself as the sort of wanted to be the champion of Saint Estèphe. Obviously, very fierce competition from Monrose. But they came out 510 a 6. And again, you could pretty much for the same money buy 2019. You could buy 17 for less, 14 and 12. Why do we think someone like that is making that active call? Is it just to, I guess, only reason I can think of is they're just trying to now sort of protect a perceived brand identity and price point, which should be associated with the wine now that they feel they're making better than ever? I don't know.
Or is it a case of thinking, well, we're 26% cheaper than we were last year and we're 55% cheaper than we were the year before? So, percentage-wise, maybe they think they've done what needs to be done.
That's because the jump up 2 years ago was too big, though, wasn't it?
Yeah. But Mark, what's the impression you get from conversations with the Negociants to whether is Cos a wine that the Negociants are going to send, are going to take their allocations of? Or, so what I'm trying to get at is Cos, maybe they want to sell a little bit, they don't actually mind not selling that much. Yeah, there isn't a compelling reason.
Bit of a Palmer.
Maybe they don't. Yeah, maybe that's a move they're starting to make. I mean, who knows? But I can't imagine if you're a negociant that you're going to be mad keen to stock up on Cos. Sell what you sell. But
I don't think, having spoken to a few negociants just recently, that there's going to be a massive uptake for them to have to take on stock at the end of the year. There's going to be some interesting conversations about what they can afford to do. But yeah, Cos, it's one of those brands where it should sell through. Years ago, it sold through, but now there doesn't seem to be the same demand, impetus, and excitement around the brand, though, which is somewhat why.
Yeah.
Becherville, to a degree, we didn't discuss, but they were another one who had a big sort of popularity only 7-8 years ago and coming forward, and they seem to misfire there.
Yeah, I think this actually feeds back into maybe your suggestion, Guy, about maybe percentages, because Becherville for the last few years, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I mean certainly from a selling point of view, my memory is Becherville's come out pretty much one of the cheapest vintages available when they have come out in the last sort of certainly since 19. So this year, not follow that suit is quite interesting, and it might be actually because it's compounded by the overall drop in the fine wine market, and so those pricings have just plummeted, and it just makes too difficult. It's a too difficult jump to make. But you could buy 20 ever so slightly for the same price, and 18 and 20 ever so slightly more, the 17 for less. And so it's an interesting example as well. I mean, we didn't particularly like it as much as, so I'll rephrase it. We liked the wine, and it was a well-made wine. We scored at 15.5, which is to indicate that a good job has been done. But I mean, I think Kaloni went out saying that he thought it was the best Saint-Julien made this year, which I just thought was somebody on a pipe.
16 with a short tasting there. So yeah, decent. But yeah.
A lot of the Margots came out. Cohen, Giscourt, Dissent. Again, unfortunately, I think these fell into, apart from Cohen, which was the one that did come out the most compellingly in terms of price. The others, you can go shopping around and find a better vintage for the same amount. So, Ditch, so you've mentioned Clarence Dillon. Any other names that we need to be on the lookout before we record our next pod? That what's going to be coming out? Have anyone announced?
I'm trying to remember who's on the calendar for this week now.
Nothing of any crazy note.
No, as I said, there's no Margot, there's no Palmer. I can name you those that don't have a more than I can that do it. Actually,
well, I mean,
but actually, won't do us a bad. It won't in a way do us any harm, because we can be back to talking to people about some of the wines that have come out, and also we're going to have Rocheron from Peter Sissek, which we really enjoyed, and it sounded from conversations last week like he was going to follow the rules, and we'd be offering Rocheron, and it's 13th vintage or something, for less than we ever have, when the wine's definitely on the up. So, and actually tasted one amongst the team. I think both Aaron and Nev were big fans as well. So yeah, we should have some fun with that.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing when Lalonde comes out. That could be...
that was a good wine.
That was a good wine, yeah. But then I guess, okay, so if I was to ask a question last week, busy week, if you could pick, let's say I came to you and said, look, Will, I would like 4 wines, please. A couple of sort of, good value numbers, and a couple to sort of stick away with a bit more longevity and aging. What would you?
Well, I would say my first 2 names down on that would probably be Carmes Haut-Brion and Rochecombe.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think at that kind of price, you're getting some juicy drinking. I mean, I'd find it hard to avoid Tertre Boeuf too. And then of the others, it's an interesting one. I mean, I quite liked Mouton, but I think for the money, would you rather have 12 bottles of Carmes Haut-Brion or 6 bottles of Mouton? Sorry, 3. So it comes down a little bit. I think, I thought it was good. Cohen was nice. So yeah, I'd Tertre Boeuf, Rochecombe, Carmes Haut-Brion, and come back to me on the other one.
Yeah, no, nice. Yeah, well, lovely. Any other closing thoughts from anyone? They want to chip in?
No, I think, there's still some excitement around the campaign, which is good, but I have a feeling that there's a window of opportunity. And so I hope that we can maintain this for the rest of the releases. It's been relatively okay compared to what we, the parameter of kind of expectations that we had. But I think the campaign is what it is. I think we're in the process of seeing En Primeur change from something that it was 10 years ago to maybe something that it will continue to be in the future. It's going to be a more restricted set of names, and I think a more restrictive time frame as well would be good in everybody's interest. So we're selling what we can, and we're recommending with brutal honesty to customers. So I don't think we can do more than that.
Yeah, and it's the same as last year. I mean, there's still a lot of availability, even at the top end. So it really is fill your boots time. There's one release this afternoon that I'm aware of that's just come out from the Bernard Magret stable, and that's Pat Clement, Rouge, Blanc, and Tours and Carnet, I believe as well. But that's come out at a price that there's a handful of wines that are cheaper. It's come out at 309 a six,
Right.
and there's plenty at 250 or less.
Yeah.
So
nice.
this is worth the price.
It's a live feed from Ditch. Maybe we'll get little webcams for people to tune in as you go through your day-to-day calls on board over there. Nobody wants to see that.
No, me included.
Okay, well, by the end of next week, we should pretty much have had, you would think, most wines out by now.
The Rocheron's coming out. Trot we'll probably do early.
Yeah.
I'll do next week maybe. And yeah.
So yeah, Margot, Haut-Brion, Lalonde,
We also have a bank holiday on Monday.
Figeacs. Hopefully they're all done with the next 2
Bank
weeks.
holiday on Monday,
we have
so
got
there might be a few surprises then because
I can't do what Mouton did last time.
yes, that was my
Yeah.
holiday scuppered last.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks for joining me, gents, and we will be back in touch again, and thank you for listening.